years. And I said, well, before I said, just put a disc together of images so I can kind of see, because I haven't been keeping up with his work. I see it here and there, and he never did, so I never pursued it. And I said, well, if he's not going to do the work, I'm not going to do the work.
Right.
And then HMAC came in. John Geza, the CEO, he referred to himself as the CEO as HMAC. He asked me if I would do the David McGee show, and I said, sure, but we need to talk with David. And then we met David there, came into Houston, and David wanted to do the show, but he had a couple of conditions for HMAC. HMAC is trying to build their museum. It's a really beautiful building. It's a 2-story building. And I had, by that point, curated 2 shows, and then I had my work was a focus of a show there. And David wanted to have a catalog, and he wanted to have some of the walls on the second floor particularly redone, because the walls were not the best for being a museum. And they said they agreed to it, and so I said I want to be the coordinator of the catalog and work with my team here. I worked with a designer before, and then my assistant director here, Patricia Healy, had worked with me on a lot of other catalogs and brochures with a gallery. So we worked on that, and then that show opened in November of last year, and then I decided to bring the show up here since I've been working on it for a year and a half. And then there's other shows that I've curated outside.
Sure.
So, but those are
so when you so there's so many questions I would love to ask you about curation and just do you. So you mentioned doing that for the McGee show and the Jimenez show. You talked about the kind of the emotional part. Do you feel like knowing Luis Jimenez in all those different ways, did that give you insight that helped you in the process, or was it were you too close? What's a better situation for a curator, to have a relationship with an artist, or to be have enough distance that you can be objective?
I think there are not many situations where there's an artist who's a curator. That's one thing. And then to curate, people that I worked with before, and in some cases, they were people in which shows that I curated and we became friends, or they were friends in which I then curated them into an exhibition. In all of that, one of the things that I feel, and again, this is totally my own bias, I feel like I can separate the art from the artist. I do think that you gain an insight by knowing the artist, because you end up talking. One of the things I enjoy about talking to other artists, particularly when I'm curating a show, is I'm able to ask questions as a curator that as an artist, a conversation may never be had. Because I found out, and this is one of the things I tell our students, is that one of the things that happens after graduate school, it seems artists don't talk to each other like they did when they were in school.
Right.
And so that was lost, except in the course of curating, where I have that access to the artist, and I'm able to say, why are you doing this? Why this material? Why this idea? Why does it evolve? And in the case of Luis's work, and also in David's work, you also see the evolution of their work, and you see how they're growing. And one of the things that Luis was really surprised at was in my selection was that there were some pieces that were actually very personal pieces. There was a watercolor that he did of his father on his hospital bed before he died. I mean, not right before he died, but during that time. Right. And then there's another one of his mother that was really very delicate watercolor. You're familiar with Luis's work. He has a very brash style in his use of watercolor or painting. He's a sculptor mainly, and he works in fiberglass. And I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he has at the Smithsonian in D.C. in front of the museum, the National Portrait Gallery and the National Museum Gallery, they have a piece called the Vaquero, and it was this cowboy with a gun.
Yeah.
That's his piece.
Right.
And there's another version at Moody Park. And so he was surprised that I wanted these pieces in the show because he said these are, he never thinks about showing these. And I said, well, to me, they do reveal a very intimate side of you that I don't see even in some of the portraits of your family. These are very delicate. They're almost kind of like you're like holding back or you're afraid or something. But yet at the same time, they're very revealing not only of the psychology of that person, the parents, but also of you. And it's something that I had not seen in other works. So there were things of that sort that I think that for me, knowing the work and you gain insight. The Mel Chin show was knowing Mel since the 70s, since the mid-70s. One of the things that he's very meticulous is sometimes when he makes his work, he's unique in that sometimes he even makes his tools to make the work.
Right.
The Museum of Fine Arts has these pillars that are based on the White House pillars, and they're to scale, except at the very top, they're, I don't know, maybe 12 feet high or so. It looks like it's broken, but it has the names of all the presidents since Monroe on them, and it has to do with the Monroe Doctrine and how we use the Monroe Doctrine to keep other outside influences out of South America and Central America. And then in the middle of that is this cornucopia, and that he created, and then he actually went to a slaughterhouse and got like the blood of sheep, I think, that he smeared on himself onto this cornucopia. And then the columns were actually built in his parents' garage. So, but when they were first shown in Houston at the Menil, and they might have been shown at the Walker. I don't remember. Yeah, they were at the Walker. But when they came to Houston, a lot of people thought they didn't think that he built them. They thought, a lot of times when artists do large pieces like public art, they get fabricators to do it. He did this in his own garage. And I remember helping him with my truck, getting him, more, I don't know if it's hydrocal or whatever.
Right.
And so what I wanted to do was do a show that showed all the workings of getting to that point. And the smaller works that were much more hands-on to show that the larger works were also just as hands-on. But because they're so monumental, there's almost the absence of the hand, and people sometimes don't relate to that being by somebody's hands. So, those kinds of insights.
So you made sure to make behind the scenes of the process part of that narrative.
Yeah.
Right. That's really interesting.
So, but I think those are the kinds of things in talking with artists and knowing artists' work. It reflects on my thinking about my work, and it makes me, question my work and my processes of working, and what I want to do in my work and how to go about it. So I learned as much. I mean, I feel like I'm still learning.
So it's almost. It almost sounds like you have this conversation in your head as a curator having a studio visit with you, the artist, and constantly asking you, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
What's the intent? What's the purpose? Do you always have good answers for that other side of your head?
To myself, sometimes, and sometimes I was like, I need to really think about that one.
Right.
I think that's sometimes as you're doing new things, you're also questioning why you do them. Sometimes there's two approaches to making art. One is you come up with a concept and then you figure out how to make that work.
Right.
And then sometimes you work intuitively and the concept just comes out of the process of working.
Right.
And then sometimes it's a combination of the two. So, because there's some things that I learned along the way, and I thought,
Sure.
that looks like I could do something else with that idea. Like just do
Right.
something else. So it's constantly moving, and one of the things that surprises me even now is that ideas just pop into my head, and then some ideas I see, from other artists, and I say, oh,
Right.
I could take that idea and do something else with it.
When I look through your body of work, it seems really diverse, and it seems like there are themes that you visit, and revisit. They're maybe not all interrelated, but maybe there is something overarching in terms of a theme. Do you ever have a sense of like an idea pop into your head and you say, oh, that's an interesting idea, but it's not a Benito Huerta? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's
and I get the impression that's not you, that you're willing to continue to take those risks.
yeah. It's really kind of funny you bring that up because back in the 80s, I don't know if you're familiar or with Neil Young.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the 80s. He did his body of work. Each album was very different from each other, and he had signed on to Geffen Records, and
Right.
Geffen sued him for not making Neil Young albums.
Right. That's funny.
When I was in East Carolina University, was for a residency for a year.
Mm-hmm.
This was immediately after I had my show at the Contemporary Arts Museum. Interestingly enough, when I got there, I said, what I want to do while I'm here is, because I had used a lot of variety of material to make my art before.
Right.
There still looked like paintings and drawings, but there was other materials that I've used. And so I said I wanted to limit myself to smaller paintings, these rectangular size or square shaped canvases.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, anything that pops into my head, I'm going to do. But I'm not going to use any material except paint,
Mm-hmm.
oil paint. And I did. And I came home with almost about 24 pieces. I did do some works on paper as well, and a couple of large paintings that were kind of a continuation of some of my previous ideas. But when I came back to Houston, I decided to take those ideas, some of those small ideas, and made them bigger. And it was just like, and then I had a show that at 93, and I called the show Aneurysm. And I had friends of mine who, a photographer, a next door neighbor who's a photographer, and he was going to photograph me with my head shaved. And there was a friend who said, well, we'll draw a dotted line on your head to where they would actually cut your head for brain surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was on this table that looked like would be a gurney. And then so the top of my head was showing, and the show was called Aneurysm. And I used a photograph for the invitation, but also had it in the show, the actual photograph. And the idea was that I do think that artists do follow a linear progression in their work, most artists. But I also thought that I wonder if these artists also get ideas that are very different than what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And what do they do with those ideas? And
Right.
Do they even just attempt to draw them or sketch them, or try to do something? And I never I never figured an answer for that. But I remember seeing